Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest edition of Chestnut Chat here on March 18th. I'm Sarah Fitzsimmons. I'm the Director of Restoration for the American Chestnut Foundation, and I'm thrilled to work with 6 other folks today to present planting American chestnuts. I think it's everybody's favorite topic to talk about. As I was chatting beforehand, just killing a couple minutes before we actually started, if you ask 100 people how to plant chestnuts, you're going to get at least 100, if not more, answers. Everybody has their favorite way to do it. We're going to be presenting what I consider basically best management practices. So this isn't going to work, or this isn't the best way necessarily to plant chestnuts everywhere, but it works most of the time everywhere. And that's mainly what we'll present. So, you know, your mileage may vary and you may very well have a better process for your given location and resources and what you're doing. But these are some nice, good starters for you to kind of a baseline to start from. So logistics, we're at 2 of 5, awesome, and that all happened during my spiel, so keep it coming. So the only people that you can see and hear today are the folks here in these squares. So there's 7 of us. For all the other attendees, we can't see you, we can't hear you, so don't worry about, you know, inadvertently leaving your mic on. You can't do it. It's just not possible. If you have a question, throw that in the Q&A. That's the easiest way for me to keep things straight. So questions go in Q&A, snarky or witty comments go in the chat, and we can share those as we move along. So questions, Q&A, comments in the chat. We've got a nice big group to keep up with things, and please interact with the Q&A. You can upvote questions, you can answer them, you can follow up with questions, and we'll keep track of that as time goes on. Today is mostly staff, mostly all. It is all staff. That is a fact. My 6-year-old daughter is learning about fact versus opinion in school. So a fact is that we are all staff personnel of the American Chestnut Foundation. Shayna is making her Chestnut Chat debut. Shayna, thank you for joining us. You've seen Tom before. He was on here last month and also gave our talk about finding wild Americans. Lily has been on here several times. Hi, Lily, good to see you again. Hoy works with me up here at Penn State, and he's been on a couple times as well. And then Kendra was on last month too. And she's always here, almost always here, 90% of the time, answering your questions in the Q&A and helping with that. So I'm recording. I think Zoom now asks you for your permission to do that. So hopefully you've all given your permission. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa to give another welcome. And then Lisa, turn it over to Kendra as our first topic.
You got it. Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Happy springtime. Hope you're anxious to get out and start your digging in the dirt with chestnuts. And you have the best experts you can find in this group here today. I'm going to render an opinion. They are awesome. Every single one of these staff members are amazing, dedicated, smart, and just incredible colleagues. I'm very lucky and honored to work with them. So thanks for joining us all today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kendra.
All right. Well, I know we have a lot of folks to get through, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen and get going. All right. Are we seeing some slides?
Looks good.
All right, good. Okay, so I get the honor of kind of kicking things off here and just giving an overview of how one might get an American chestnut to plant. You can't really talk about planting if you don't have chestnuts to plant. So I'm going to focus primarily on the distribution programs that TACF runs as an organization, kind of the staff run programs, but we'll get into a few different things. So the TACF programs, which is what we'll focus primarily on, are our wild type seedling sales, which those of you who are members probably saw a few emails about within the last couple of weeks, and also our seed level memberships, which those of you who support us at that level also would have just received your seeds. So we're hoping this is somewhat timely to talk about what you do with that material. Also important to note that our chapters also often run distribution programs. It's really variable what they have to offer, what, if it's seeds, seedlings, containerized seedlings, just seeds and pots. I've seen a lot of different options for what the chapters may or may not make available to folks. So rather than go over all those details, we're going to focus on the TACF run programs because we have a little bit more knowledge of those specifics, but we'll touch on the chapter stuff as well. So first up is the wild type American chestnut seedling sales. And again, this is a brief overview. Hoy is going to talk a little bit more about the details. But for this program, these are nursery grown bare root seedlings. A few of our partners are growing these for us. And these are wild type American chestnuts. And what that means is they're not improved in any way, shape, or form in terms of blight resistance or anything else. They're what's growing out in the landscape at this point. So we do not expect these trees to do very well if they are exposed to blight. In fact, we very much expect them to die from blight if something else doesn't get them first. That said, when and if blight finds a wild type tree is really hit or miss. It could be within the first 5 years, which is really kind of a bummer. It could be 20, 30 years sometimes before blight might find one of these trees. So it's always worth a shot. And it's a great learning experience. One of the reasons we often encourage folks to plant wild type trees is for practice. The material from our breeding program is a little harder to come by. The Darling 58 trees that a lot of folks are excited about from SUNY ESF aren't available yet, but when they are, those are also going to be hard to come by. So trying your hand at growing wild type trees is a little less risky. It's a good way to test out your own growing style and, and how that matches up with the needs of the species, as well as how your site actually does to support these trees. And because these are wild type trees that are collected from across the landscape, it's also a great way to help preserve the genetic diversity of the species. From the nitty gritty, this is a sale that we open to our members, and then we like to think every year that we're also going to be able to open it to the general public. That said, we always sell out to our members before we can actually open this opportunity up to folks who are not members of TACF. That said, we try to make as many trees available to as many people as possible. So we sell these seedlings in bundles of 5, 10, or 25. But no one's allowed to get more than 25. So it's not like you can wait until the sale opens and then order 500 seedlings and get, a good chunk of what we'll be distributing. There is a cap on what everyone can order. That said, I think, folks do kind of sit around like they're waiting on concert tickets for the link to go live on the day the sale opens. And we definitely do get sales coming in right at midnight. So it's a very popular program, even though these are wild type trees and, are not blight tolerant. The sale is in early March. I think it was on the 8th this year, 8th or 9th. So just a little while ago. And then the seedlings are lifted and shipped from our nursery partners in early April. And again, Hoy is going to tell you a lot more about this program. The other opportunity that we make available to members is our seed level membership program. This is not technically a seed sale. These are sort of a thank you gift for supporting our programs, but this is the best material we have from our research farm in Meadowview. So these trees have intermediate blight tolerance. They're harvested from the best trees that we've been able to select in our program, and they represent 40 plus years of work to improve blight tolerance in American chestnut. Quantities of these best seeds are somewhat limited. I think we're typically able to honor everyone every year that makes a donation at this level. So this has also been a really popular program and really helps to support our mission. Nitty gritty for this program, again, these are thank you gift seeds. So kind of like your NPR tote bag or coffee mug, you get chestnuts from the Chestnut Foundation. But the seed level support starts at the root seed level at $300, and you can certainly support us up to the canopy seed level at $1,000, get 12 seeds. Because these are seeds from our breeding program, these are covered by a germplasm agreement, and we make that really easy for folks to sign right online in the process of taking out one of these memberships. You do need to sign up by January 1st of a given year so that we can ship your seeds that spring. And if you sign up after that date, then you're just on the list for the following year. And again, seeds ship in early March, so a lot of you, everyone actually who participated in this program for 2022 should have received their seeds already. Finally, our chapters do distribute seeds and seedlings occasionally to their members. Not every chapter has a program, but many do. I'm most familiar with the programs in my region, which is New England, and I know New York, Pennsylvania also have programs for seed and seedling availability to members. You know, some chapters use this as an opportunity just as a member benefit. Some use it as an incentive for new members to join. You know, join as a member of our chapter, and we'll give you some new trees. So the details of this can be hard to keep up with, but typically each chapter is pretty good at communicating what they may or may not have available. So if you missed out on one of the TACF sales and you still want trees, you know, it can't hurt to check in with your local chapter and see what they might have available. Oops, and I hit escape instead of next, but that was my last slide. So actually, no, it wasn't. I'm kidding. Let's just go one more. The last thing I did want to touch on is just some shipping restrictions. So all of the material from, at least from TACF, we try to follow the rules. You know, we have chestnut blight in the US because we didn't have quarantine rules. And now that we do, we try to be pretty good about following those. So bare root seedlings are only shipped to locations east of the Mississippi. Seeds may be shipped west of the Mississippi and to Michigan. And I'm not sure if there's a seedling restriction for Michigan, but they do have a quarantine rule of sorts. But any seeds shipped to the west are treated with a bleach solution just to sterilize them and you know, knock back any additional pathogens that we don't want to spread farther than they already are. But it's a standard horticultural practice, shouldn't impact the seeds in any way. That said, we can't ship to Washington, Oregon, or California. There's quarantine restrictions, or I don't even know if it's quarantine. We're not allowed to. So unfortunately, if you live in one of those states, we can't send you material. And then we can't ship outside of the US either. For folks outside of the US, you can pursue getting a phytosanitary permit. And I don't know, we might be able to work with you if you can do the legwork on that, but we just don't have the capacity to track those down for folks. So that is actually the end of what I had to share. And I put in a question slide because I just always do, but I think we're going to save questions to the end. So I think I'm going to end it there. And I believe Hoy is up next.
No, but thank you.
Is Lily next? Do I have the order wrong? Oh, I should have switched them in the. I
printed it out again because I am familiar with both the Brady Bunch and Hollywood Squares. I still use paper and printer print things out. But there are so many questions. It's crazy. So I'm working on answering as many as I can in the Q&A as they come up. Thank you guys for being so involved and engaged. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Lily, you are up next, and you are going to explain the member seedling program and how they are produced.
That's right. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Kendra, for that great presentation. Let me start my PowerPoint here. Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Lily Kingsolver. I'm the nursery manager at the Glen C. Price Research Farm in Meadowview, Virginia. And Kendra covered a lot of it, but I'm going to go a little more in depth into our membership seeds, where they come from, and how you can get some if you're interested in doing so. So, like I said, Kendra covered some of this, but I'm going to cover it again. The Member Seed Program is a program by which we give as a gift some of our best backcross seeds to all of our donors above the $300 amount. So this serves several purposes. People ask us all the time how they can access our seeds, how they can get these backcross seeds. And even though we would love to, you know, send them out to everybody who wants them, there are a limited number of them. If we gave them to everyone who wanted them, we would be a production farm. We wouldn't be able to get any research done. So instead, we have a certain number that we can give as gifts to this exclusive group. So this allows some people to access the seeds. This also is a great way for us to show appreciation for our donors. We are super, super thankful to our donors and our members. If you guys are members, thank you. If you would like to become a member, I'll let you know how to do that later. This is also a great way for us to get some feedback. You know, if we send people seeds and they grow them up for 10 years and maybe three of them are doing great and one of them died of blight, then they can give us that information. We can collect these data from our citizen scientists, and that helps us hone the backcross program even further. And also, another reason that we don't sell these seeds is because this is still very much in process. Even though these are our best backcross seeds, we're still learning a lot, we're still honing a lot. And so we don't have a product to offer, but rather we want people to be part of this process. We want people to grow these seeds up, let us know how it goes, let us know how we can do better in the future. We're learning all the time. So the seeds that we choose are B3F3 seeds. So to give you a quick overview of the backcross progress, we first start by crossing a Chinese tree with an American tree. That gives us an F1. Of course, that's half American, half Chinese. Cross them again gives us a B1, or I'm sorry, cross that F1 with an American again gives us a B1. Cross that B1 with an American gives us a B2, with an American again gives us a B3. At this point, we start back crossing the B3 trees with other B3 trees. Those give us B3F2s. Then we cross those with other B3F2s. That gives us B3F3s. These are 15/16 American trees, and that gives us the highest levels of DNA of the American trees, which of course is what we want, with the highest levels of partial resistance inherited from the Chinese trees.
Hey Lily.
So at this point,
Hey
yes.
Lily, are you supposed to be sharing some slides?
Yeah, can you guys not see? Oh shoot, oh my gosh. Am I not?
No, not yet. That's cool.
Uh-oh.
Big green button in the middle.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm like 3 slides in and I wasn't even sharing. Let me see. Here it is, here it is.
There it is.
I'm sorry, what a boring presentation with no slides.
No,
oh my
you're
gosh,
you're delightful to listen to, Lily, but I wanted to make sure, I know you put a lot of work into this, so I wanted to make sure that you get to share them.
Oh my goodness.
See, that's a gorgeous
so sorry,
picture.
everybody.
Look at that.
What a terrible presentation. Oh my gosh, sorry. Okay, I'll show you my first couple slides again. Here's a entry slide. Here's a little list of the things I just talked about. And here's a great picture of Eric harvesting seeds as well. This is the chart that would have been very helpful if you were looking at as I described the backcrossing program. But again, these B3F3 seeds are 15/16 American. They combine our highest levels of American DNA with our highest levels of resistance inherited from the Chinese trees. These are the seeds that we send out. They come from our seed orchards here in Meadowview, where we have a lot of selected B3F3 and B3F2 trees. And at this point, we've selected them to a point that we can allow them to open pollinate and harvest those. So to give you a little overview of how this process works, we, like I said, allow our selection orchards to interpollinate, open pollinate with each other. This gives us a lot of burrs, which we harvest by hand in October. They go into onion bags, many onion bags, which we haul back to the office and shuck. We shucked 58,000 seeds out of burrs this past fall. So you can imagine if we were selling seeds, you can imagine how much work that would be. That would be full-time job. We wouldn't be able to do anything else. So this is just the membership seeds are plenty. After we shuck them, they go into cold storage or stratification. We put them in peat moss in bags over the winter. This is so that we can tell the seeds when it's spring rather than them telling us when it's spring by germinating when it gets warm. Then last week of February, first week of March, we put all of those seeds into tiny little bags, put all of those tiny little bags into tiny little boxes, and we send them out all over the United States, except of course for Washington, Oregon, and California, where we can't send them. And again, all the ones west of the Mississippi are bleached with 10% bleach solution. Then they arrive in people's mailboxes and hopefully go into potting mix where they become adorable chestnut seedlings. So if you at this point are saying, how do I get some seedlings myself? You can do that by visiting this website listed here. You can also find this information by Googling the American Chestnut Foundation, clicking on our website, and then going to the membership area of the website. Thank you so much. That's all I got. Sorry that half of that was slideless.
It was awesome. Thank you, Lily. Your pictures are awesome too. I'm glad we got that worked out.
I'm really glad you reminded me to use them.
Well, Kendra pinged me too. She texted. She's like, I think there should be slides here.
Phew.
She was right.
Sorry, guys. I was just like plowing ahead.
All right, great explanation. Hoy, you are explaining the Wild American program, how they are produced, also wild trees are open pollinated, and what that means.
Indeed. All right, so we'll try my hand at this whole sharing event. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Looks good. I love that picture.
Perfect.
Where is that?
So this is at Native Forest Nursery down in Georgia.
Nice.
So this is one of the American seedling beds. Hello, everyone. My name is Hoy. I work here at the Penn State office for the PA New Jersey chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, and also dabble with the coordination efforts for the seedling programs that we coordinate with cooperative nurseries. So this will be a somewhat repetitive, somewhat related to the presentations that Kendra already gave and Lily gave. There's definitely overlap, and then there are some digressions from what Lily just explained. So what I'll be covering is specifically for our wild type American program, where those seed come from, general locations, how they transform from the seed that we are sent and harvest into the seedlings that eventually end up on some of your doors, hopefully very soon. And nature's meddling, if you will, on why sometimes things are not exactly what we expect them to be. So this map is very generalized. It is not representing every location that we harvest from. It just gives an idea of where the distribution is, whether the material is from a single wild type tree, which are the blue teardrops, the wild trees that happen to be along the Appalachian Trail, which is the result in part of the mega transect project that took place several years ago now, but there were many trees identified along the Appalachian Trail, and those are being utilized, and new trees are being found in production, and we're able to harvest that material and get it, get the genetics preserved and shipped out to some of you. And then the red teardrops with the square indicate our more concentrated American orchards. So these are either GCOs, our germplasm conservation orchards, which are specifically designed to have a diverse range of germplasm, genetic material, and concentrated in one spot. So instead of driving for hours to one tree, you're driving to one location and you can harvest many trees. So that just is a level of efficiency that we gain by doing that. So this is a perfect example. On the left here, you have a tree. This, I believe, is from the Hahn Orchard in northwestern PA. And you can see some of the burrs at the top of the tree. And that, you know, if you take this and multiply it by 100 trees or so, that's the benefit of an orchard. You have all these trees, one spot, you can go and harvest a lot in one day. The picture on the right, I happened to get the timing right. The squirrels had gone up to the top of a tree out in the middle of the woods, nipped off all the burrs for me, and I was able to just go under there with a basket, throw them all in, and take it back to the office to be shucked later. So, but you can see, you know, your productivity is going to be greatly reduced doing the single tree at a time method. And then this is just a picture of, again, the Hahn Orchard on the left, an example of one of the burrs, 3 fully pollinated chestnuts there, and then kind of the congregation of the seed that we're able to collect and ship out. So all these seeds, similar to what Lily mentioned, they get stratified in our coolers here at Penn State over the winter, and then they will get distributed to the nurseries that we work with. So we are currently working with 2 nurseries specifically to produce the wild type Americans that we do the seedling sale for just a couple weeks ago, as Kendra mentioned. And that allows us to, be efficient in the resources that we have and the nurseries resources as well. So we work with Native Forest Nursery down in Chatsworth, Georgia, and we've been working with them for a long time, at least since 2015. And then we have a new nursery partner with Howard Nursery. This is a Pennsylvania Game Commission nursery, just about an hour down the road from Penn State here. Just a fact from this is Brian Burhans is currently the executive director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, but he was Lisa Thompson's predecessor for the CEO position of TACF. So this is just an overview of the nurseries I just mentioned. So you have Native Forest here on the left, and they're quite a large operation. They're producing 35 million seedlings annually, and they've been in existence under a couple different names, but since the late 60s. And then on the right here, you have the Game Commission Nursery at Howard, and they've been around since 1954, and they're producing up to 8 million seedlings a year. So smaller scale, but still these are commercial operations. They have an emphasis on productivity and efficiency and, being aware of profit and costs. So this is just an image of what some of the beds will look like when the seedlings have germinated. So let me back up one step. So we'll send the seed out. The nurseries receive them in late winter up to February. And as soon as the conditions allow, they'll go out, especially Native Forest. They're pretty much able to plant at any time. So as soon as they receive seed, they'll take it out, they'll prep the bed. So they'll till it, they'll cut grooves, and then they hand plant. Due to the quantities that we have, they'll hand plant every single one of the seedlings that you can see in this picture. So it is a labor intensive project. We're greatly appreciative for the work that they do because it takes a lot to get them in the ground. But this picture was taken toward the end of the first growing season. So if you think of, they're planted in February, they germinate into April, and then this photo is taken in August. So Tom and Sarah mentioned earlier an average height of 2 feet, and that's roughly what these are. You can see a couple in the back that are outliers and much taller, but on average, they're going to be about 2 feet tall. And then this is the tricky part of my presentation. Hopefully this will play and show you how exactly they get out of the ground. Excellent. So as you saw in that video, it's a really concise timeline of the seedlings get lifted mechanically. So that red contraption you saw, it undercuts the root system. It vibrates and slowly works the seedlings out, shaking a majority of the dirt off. And then you saw the workers there collecting and bundling the seedlings, and then packaging, and from there they would get distributed to the folks that have ordered them. And it is very labor intensive, and they're trying to balance productivity with seedling care. So you may eventually or occasionally see seedlings that have been a little roughed up, but this is the reason why they're trying to, as efficiently as they can move through 35 million seedlings every year. That's a big job. Well, there we go. All right, and then very quickly, my last slide here is, I mentioned nature gets to meddle occasionally. So when we're harvesting these seeds, we know who the mother is. We know that they're coming from either verified wild type American trees, or they're coming from American planted orchards. And we are aware that there's not a large amount of pollen contamination that's likely in those areas, specifically with the orchards. However, pollen can travel up to a quarter mile and even further. And occasionally that pollen hits the right mark, finds a female flower, and you can end up with a hybrid, an F1. So Lily mentioned that initial cross between an American and a Chinese. So that is what that means. It may be a Chinese parent, maybe Japanese, European. There are 7 to 9 species within the Castanea genus, depending on who you ask. So any one of those can potentially pollinate these trees. So if you do receive seedlings and one looks like an oddball, that is why. But again, the Chestnut Foundation, we do our best to limit that occurrence and prevent it when possible. Special thanks to Native Forest for allowing us to use that media that they created, and for the work that Native Forest Nursery and Howard Nursery are doing to support our programs and all the work that they do.
Excellent. I love the video. That's really cool. It's amazing what those bare root seedlings go through. I had a quick question. If someone is getting the bare root seedlings and can't plant them right away, what should they do?
So the sooner the better to plant, obviously. If that's not possible, what we would recommend is keep them in a cool, dark place. Make sure the roots stay damp but not wet. You don't want soggy roots because that invites mold. And you want to exclude light because that will help to keep the trees dormant as long as possible. And then once you're ready to plant, bring them out of that cooler or dark, cold place that you have them. It's recommended to dunk them in water for at least a couple hours prior to planting, and then take them out and plant as you would normally. And by cold, that's like 33 degrees, right? The closer to freezing, but not freezing, the better. Right. Yep.
So not like 50, but like 33, 30, like no more than 40 if you can. Right. Okay, Hoy, beautiful. Thank you very much. Shayna, making her Chestnut Chat debut, is going to talk about statistics. How many seedlings go out in a year? Where do they go? How fast do we sell out, etc.?
Yeah, and I'm not nervous at all. Let's get.
You're going to do amazing.
Alrighty. One moment. Alrighty. 1 second. Oop. So, out of how do I do presentation mode? Oh, there it is. Woohoo! Presenter. Okay.
Oh, other way. You had it right the first time.
other way. You're all seeing my notes.
Yep, I'm seeing your notes.
Ah, no.
So if you're on a laptop, you actually can't see your notes at the same time.
Oh, no.
But if you need that, then go this way, because this is the only way you're going to be able to see them. And that just means we get to read your notes.
Oh, thanks, guys. This is great. This is totally what I wanted. Okay.
Totally what you want.
Swell. Well, please just focus and don't read my notes, as I will be reading them. Hi, I'm Shayna. I'm the Donor Relations Manager at TACF, and I ran the wild type American chestnut seedling sale from 2018 to 2021. And I am proudly passing the torch to Gifts and Records specialist, Laura Harrison. So great job to Laura and the team this year in 2022. Was selling out after, I think, 5 days of it being live. So before I dive into the numbers, I just want to thank all of our members. I know a lot of you on the call today or on this presentation today are members, so you really make it happen. Your support and dedication to the rescue of this tree really inspires me. So from all of us at TACF, thank you. So here we are, going to the graphs and fun data points. I feel like I need to make this bigger so you guys can see these numbers. Can you see the numbers okay?
I can see the numbers okay.
Okay, get your magnifying glasses out. So, as you may know, this sale is a member benefit, as a slew of us have now mentioned. And as you've probably received the emails and the ads in the magazine, but there's a really high demand for our wild type American seedlings. And every year we do our best to grow our inventory and literally grow our inventory. Due to the high demand in 2019, the sale became a members only perk. So you will see that on the graph and my typo here, that we dropped from sending out the notification of the sale to nearly 12,000 people to dropping it to just below 4,000 people. So it used to go out to everybody before 2019, and then we made it members only due to the demand. And we try our best to listen to our members, analyze the data, and so just some proof of that is in 2021, we added the bundle size of 5 because before that it was 10, 25, and 50, and then we capped at 50. In 2022, this year, we dropped the bundle of 50 and the orders were capped at 25, which is why in 2021, we sold out by 2:30 p.m. the same day the sale went live. And this year, it was able to be available live to our members until the fifth day of it being online. So as you can see, we are getting closer. We're honing in. So the hope is that we'll have enough stock to match the potential buyers because honestly, we want everybody that wants seedlings to have seedlings. So we do really appreciate your patience, persistence, and vigilance. This one, let me see. So this map, I might go to letting you guys just see it and try and nope. Never mind. Yes, there it is. This one's really tiny. So these are some data points from sales from 2017 to 2022. The numbers reflected in the table are the actual amount of seedlings that were sent to individual seedlings sent to customers. So you'll notice that it kind of does follow the native range and overlays a lot of the Appalachian Trail. And but it's really a beautiful thing to see, everybody's interest and, with something that can, succumb to blight. It's beautiful that you all are interested and purchasing these to grow. And so I know a couple of us have mentioned, but if you do want to receive seedlings and aren't already a member, please join. Reach out to our wonderful membership department. Reach out to me. Anybody at TACF is happy to talk to you. So more on the perks of growing wild type, I will stop sharing. And thank you all for reading my notes with me, and pass it to Sarah.
Thanks, Shayna. Excellent. I liked your map. I'm a map person, so thanks for putting that together.
Yeah,
it's kind of cool to see people like along the Appalachian Trail, how, you know, and then also like in the range, and then a lot of people down in Florida.
Yeah.
I'd really like to know how trees are doing like down in Miami.
Yeah.
So if any of you on here are from Miami, let me know how they're growing the tropical chestnuts. All right, so it is now my turn. I am going to share my screen. Share. You see my email. There we go. And all right, so why plant these wild type American chestnuts, or even intermediate resistant stuff that Lily was talking about? These trees will get the blight to some degree. Wild type Americans will get the blight much more severely than the backcross trees that Lily was discussing. So our backcross trees have intermediate resistance. And while we're discussing, I think I might pull up a couple pictures of that, and I saw someone wanted to see a picture of a burr too. So when we get to the Q&A, I'll pull up some pictures of that to share with everyone. But if you're wondering why you should plant wild type American chestnuts, even though they're going to get the blight and die, there are a few absolutes in life. So what, death, taxes, and your American chestnut will get the blight. That's just a given. How much blight it's going to get, when it's going to get the blight are dependent on several factors. Usually chestnuts get the blight by age 5 to 8. I've seen stems last as long as 20 years. I've seen really lucky individuals live as long as 80. But those are super duper rare. Even the 80-year-olds eventually get blight and succumb. But despite all of that, there is a reason to plant these wild types, and they're going to resprout. Even though they get the blight, they're going to die back. They're going to resprout from the base if you continue to maintain them with somewhat minimal care. But you should plant them to preserve native germplasm. That's the real big purpose. Restoration is going to take a long time, and we're going to need backgrounds, diverse genetic backgrounds, to diversify disease-resistant trees. So we've done diversification in our backcross material. We're now focusing on diversification of Darling 58. And then there are other materials that are coming behind Darling 58, both from breeding material and from other engineering or biotech techniques. Eventually we'll work on CRISPR. We're going to need diverse backgrounds to work on. So plant so we can conserve native and preserve native germplasm. Wild American chestnuts are excellent for early successional habitat. So if you guys are part of the young forest movement, of which I am a believer, there are a lot of different reasons why chestnuts make an excellent member of this early successional habitat. If you have a location that you're trying to convert into forest, or you're doing a cut of some less valuable, maybe you just got a huge swath of birch or high graded chestnut oak, something like that. You want to convert it into something that's either early successional habitat or higher value timber. American chestnuts are a great thing to insert into that kind of planting. They'll always stay small because of the blight, and you'll get nut production. So nuts for wildlife. In our wild type American plots, the amount of turkeys, bears, deer, squirrels, grouse, blue jays, you name it, that comes into these plots is really phenomenal. So hunt clubs really like to plant wild type Americans, but also if you're a nature enthusiast, it's a great way to invite some really diverse types of wildlife into your location. Another big bonus is to accustom yourself to care and maintenance of chestnut trees. So figure out if your site is appropriate. Go back and review the site selection chestnut chat that we did in last May. You want to make sure that your site is good. Planting Americans can really give you the best sense of whether or not that site is suitable too. It could be yet another metric for you to determine site suitability. Again, You can get nut crops. Those dead stems you can make walking sticks out of. Sometimes they'll get big enough to make like frames or stools. We have lots of people who use these dead stems for various wood products, even though they are juvenile wood. Have a place where people can come see trees and see one up close and personal. People tend to join and get a part of the movement once they see trees. So the more places where we can send people to see trees, the better. And then also you can see, unfortunately, how quickly this fungus gets in and can take down a tree. So ultimately, we want people planting these trees. You can cross them with blight-resistant material. Eventually, you can get nut production. There's lots of benefits for planting them sooner rather than later. Let's talk a little bit about diversification. Alex Sandercock is a grad student at Virginia Tech. He's been working really closely with Jared Westbrook and Jason Holliday, and then other staff across the foundation. It's a draft paper that's up on BioRivix. Highly recommend it. Super interesting. Go check it out. If you look up Sandercock et al., American Chestnut on BioRivix, you'll find this paper. Basically, what he's been looking at is how diverse is the American chestnut through the native range. And what he's found, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can say that American chestnut is either 2 or 3 different types of populations. A southwestern population, a maybe mid-Atlantic population, and then a New England population. It depends on how you crunch the numbers as to whether it's 2, just a south and a north, or 3, a south, mid-Atlantic, and New England. So the point is that we want to be able to capture as much of this diversity across the range for long-term restoration purposes, particularly in the Southwest. So these Southwestern populations are most important and the most difficult to get. The mid-Atlantic populations are relatively easy to capture, as are the New England. We've got lots of seed-producing trees. That doesn't mean we don't need more, but a real focus of ours right now are those Southwestern populations. We want to be able to pollinate, to use blight-resistant material, pollen to put on these trees. We hope that you'll do this on the trees that you have. So we've been holding a series of pollination workshops to teach folks how to do this. We trained about 100 people in 2021. We hope to do even more in 2022. If you have a location with a fruiting American chestnut and you want to learn how to do this technique, let us know. Let one of your RSCs know, me, Kendra, Tom, or Jamie. In the South, hopefully we can arrange a couple more pollination workshops, get a bunch of people out to learn how to do this technique to diversify our blight-resistant material. Here's a wild type American chestnut orchard, a GCO that was in Mill Grove. That's down near Philadelphia. These trees were 7 years old at the time I took this picture. You can see all these green burrs. So this was in the summer. So fruiting already, nice, clean, manicured. The trees, again, they die back, they resprout. Here's a grafted germplasm conservation orchard. This is at Purdue, the Duke orchard. I don't know if you can check this orange stuff out. That's all blight that was then covered and kind of mud packed with a fungicide and some mud as well. And that was effective for a couple years on the trees. Long-term in our chestnut orchards, not just GCOs pretty much everywhere, but this is of a particular GCO in the Zoar Valley in New York. We see about 50% survival over time. So you can see there's variation in terms of year planted as to how long we get drop off in death of these materials. But the take home of this chart is if you plant 100 trees, you'll probably have 50 survive long-term. If you plant 5, you'll probably have 2 or 3 that survive long-term. So whatever you plant, you can predict that you're going to get about half of what you plant actually survive to fruiting age. This is the Hahn orchard. Hoy mentioned this a couple times. This is where we get a lot of our American chestnut material for the wild seedling program. This tree, or this orchard, was planted in Sandy Lake, PA in 1983. And that's Tracy Coulter there. Tracy's on here today. Hi, Tracy. Looking at these trees in the winter. And you can see this is what you're going to expect. They're not trees, they're clumps, they're sprout clumps. So the trees grow up, they die back, they resprout, they die back, they resprout. You've got blight all over the place, but the nut production on here is really phenomenal. Here's our crew. We were at the Hahn orchard a couple years ago. And again, this is what it looks like. You've got tons of trees, lots of sprouts going, but a lot of nut production. Here's us grabbing some nuts from the ground. Again, it's kind of nice that American chestnuts stay low to the ground because it's easier to harvest. And then here's, this is the back of Gary Miskey's truck when he was doing, this is just a day's harvest, an easy couple hours, grab a bunch of nuts, throw our burrs, throw them in the back of the truck. So for that person, I can't remember, who was looking to figure out what burrs look like, this is what burrs look like at the time of harvest. So they're green, they eventually turn brown. The main chapter, I don't know if they coined this phrase, but their newsletter is called the tree urchin. And I love that. I think tree urchin is, instead of sea urchin, is the perfect description for what burrs look like. So again, there's a lot of different reasons for us to plant wild type or even intermediate resistant backcross trees. We're going to preserve germplasm. We're going to be able to diversify material. You're going to get nut production. And there's a lot of different reasons to do this for long-term restoration. So whatever you do, plant some trees, get accustomed to working with this species and figure out if your land is right for doing it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk about how to plant and care for these trees. You're muted, Tom.
I know I hit the unmute button. That means I wasn't muted this whole time and you guys probably heard me in the background.
Not at all.
Okay, good. Share my screen. Okay, so getting down to brass tacks, for anybody who's interested in planting and growing chestnut trees, I'm going to offer some tips. This is sort of our best practices guide. But as Sarah mentioned, if you ask 100 different people how to grow chestnuts, you're going to get 100 different answers. And the one thing that I've learned over the years is that I really haven't figured out the best way to grow chestnut trees. Every time I think I got something figured out, I try it again. The next year, it doesn't work for me anymore. But what we do know is we know there's a lot of things that could go wrong when you're planting chestnuts, because frankly, growing American chestnuts, they're a really fickle, it's a really fickle tree. And so you really have to try to get as many things right as you can. So before I launch into my talk, if I can, I'd like to draw your attention to our website. If you go to the TACF website and you click on this link called resources, you can go down to, this is called the TACF fact sheets. And if you click on that, you'll find that there is a wealth of information already here. And one of the fact sheets that we have is this one called How to Grow Chestnuts. And this is a great little handy fact sheet, and it covers everything that I'm going to be talking about today, from starting your seeds in containers, how to plant the seed properly, what size container you're looking for. It has tips on the types of soils, when you plant the trees outside, what you're looking for site characteristics, how to protect your trees, etc. Does it cover every possible thing that could go wrong? No, it doesn't. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but this fact sheet is really helpful. And I encourage everyone to go to our website and look for that fact sheet. And then of course, there's a lot of other interesting fact sheets that might be really helpful to you. And there's a few things that I'm going to touch on today that you can get more information by looking at our fact sheets. But in a nutshell, I'm going to quickly go over planting and growing chestnut trees. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the most important things to consider if you're going to try to grow chestnut trees is site selection. Also talk a little bit about seedlings and seeds, planting strategies for growing both of those. I'm going to talk a little bit about some geographical information, like depending on where in the country you are, might influence some of the decisions you make about how to grow your chestnut trees. And then a very quick little overview of some of the important maintenance needs. This is definitely not all inclusive. I'm just giving a few of the interesting and important points for you to consider. One of the most important things is site selection. American chestnuts are adapted to well-drained acidic soils. They're an upland species. They grow up in oak hickory forests throughout the Appalachians. So if your soil is easy to work, easy to dig in, it seems like it's silty, loamy soil, or if it's got a good sand content, then you probably have good soil for growing your chestnut trees. But the one thing we know is that a terrible site for growing chestnut trees is soils with a high clay content, wet soils, or hard packed soils. And you can find these anywhere. They might be at low elevations. You might find a lot of clay soils and wet soils in the Piedmont, but you can be upslope and still find these. If you're up in high elevation, but you're in hilly country and you're down by the creek and the soils are wet, or if you're on an old farm and the soil seems to have a lot of clay or it's really hard packed, those are things for you to consider. Those, I'm not saying we haven't had people grow in those types of soils and have success, but you're starting in a bad site and it's going to be an uphill battle. So one thing I say is try to consider what chestnuts are adapted to. You can see in this one picture, upland oak hickory forests, that's the kind of soil that chestnuts grow best in. And those soils are very soft. You could dig in them easily, well, except for the roots and the rocks, but they're very soft soils. They tend to have low clay content and they're high in silt and sand, and they're well drained. And if you just go down the creek, I took this other picture, it's just about 30 meters away from this first picture, but I went downhill towards the creek and it immediately became a mesic site, very wet, a lot more red maple, birch, black locust. So just think about what chestnut is adapted to and then go look at your soils. Now you might be growing in a forested site, in which case you're going to be specifically looking for a hardwood forest type of a site, something that's an oak hickory forest or a pine oak forest or something with a large oak component, more oaks than red maples. You're going to be in the right place and avoid the bottomland sites. But you might be trying to grow trees in your yard or in front of your state capitol building or a church or something, in which case the best thing to do is dig a nice big hole in that site. See what the soil looks like. Feel it with your fingers. Does it have a high clay content? If you pour water in it, does it take forever to drain? Is the soil impossible to dig in? Is it so hard that you can't dig a hole? If any of those are the case, then it's probably not a good site to grow chestnuts. But if you can dig a hole relatively easily and you can dig a nice big hole and the water drains, then you're probably okay. The next thing to think about in site selection is what kind of exposure are you going to get your seedlings? Now, chestnuts will grow well if they get a lot of sun. So avoid planting in a forested area unless you've had some timber removal, maybe you have a gap or it's been thinned. And if sunlight's getting to your seedlings, then you should be okay. Sometimes people are underplanting in a silviculture site and they're going to do a release at some point. That might work. We're still looking into that. But generally speaking, we want you to put these in an open site where they're going to get a lot of soil. So that could be an open field like you see here, or it could be in your forest, if you have forest on your property, in a place that's been opened up. Either it's been clear cut or maybe there was a fire or a blowdown, but pick a nice open site where there's plenty of light. And if you're in an open site, there's a difference between old fields like old farm sites or parks or, in these sort of landscape sites versus an old clear cut. And that's going to affect some of your decisions. Like for instance, site preparation, depending on if you're in a site where there's a lot of grasses, you're going to have to remove those grasses, at least a 3-foot diameter ring around each tree. But whatever the vegetation is, you're going to have to keep it down. You're going to have to remove it and you're going to have to stay on top of it. You're going to have to keep those grasses and those weeds and the understory vegetation cut back and keep them from competing with your chestnut trees. And a lot of things, if you're in a forest, those coppicing trees will outcompete your chestnut trees right away. Within a couple of years, they'll overtop your little seedlings. So you got to go in there and you got to remove them. You can do this mechanically or you can use herbicides. If you're trying to control grasses around your seedlings, make sure to keep them not bad. Again, you can use mechanical herbicide methods. Just make sure you don't get herbicide on your seedlings. And then if you're working in a site where the soils are a little more packed, say in your yard, or if you're putting in seedlings in front of a high profile location, you can dig a hole. If the soil is easy to work, but it still takes some digging, the bigger the hole you dig, the better. And you can just dig a really big hole. We often say twice as deep as the pot and as wide as deep. So you have a nice bowl-shaped hole. Dig that out, stir up the soil and put it back. If there's a lot of clay in your soil, you can amend it. You can add some soilless mix or even clay breaker. But stirring that soil up and making a nice big hole will make it easier for the roots to spread out in that soil. And that's going to give your seedlings a really nice start. If the soil is really packed and kind of hard and has a high clay content, you dig a small hole, the seedlings are just going to sit in that hole and they're not going to spread out very well. So giving them a good start for their first few years might involve digging a nice big hole and potentially amending it a little bit. Okay, so after you've done your site selection, you can decide, are you going to direct seed or plant a seedling? Now, most of the time, I would advise people to plant seedlings, get them started first, either get bare root seedlings or start your seeds in containers. But a lot of times we direct seed. We do this a lot when we're planting orchards, for instance. We have a fenced area, the site's been ripped, we subsoil it, we disc it up, we prep the site really well. And you can see in this picture here, we had augured the soil really well. Then we dig out a small cup-shaped hole and we put in some of our seed starter mix. And I'll talk about what that mix is in a minute, but you put a little bit of a mix in and then you're going to plant your seed and you're going to protect it from critters. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. But just note how when we're putting the seed in, we get the soil prepped, then we put a little bit of the little cup-shaped hole of the seed starter mix and put the seed in that. That's going to sort of cradle your seed and protect it while it gets some roots in. But pretty soon the roots are going to get into the native soil. That's really important for your roots to be in contact with the native soil. We want the roots to be able to get the nutrients and attach to the biome and get the moisture from the groundwater as soon as possible. And another thing about when you're direct seeding is note that this seed is being planted, it's on it basically on its flat side. Now this has one of those little a radicle, that's a proto root that's coming out. We want that pointed down, but you still want your seed to be relatively flat because the root and the shoot come out of the same point on the tip of the seed. So you don't want that seed pointed down or up because you want the root to be able to go down easy, but you want that shoot to be able to go up easy, right? So don't point the seed straight down and the shoot has to come out and do a J hook to get up to the surface. Make sure that, whatever it takes to get that seed so it's oriented, so the roots go down, the shoots go up, that's very important. A little bit more on, whoops, get rid of that. A little bit more on planting seeds is, if you're actually going to plant your seeds in a container, that's what I recommend. If you get seeds, try to put them in a container first and grow them for a while, at least for a few months before you plant in the spring. And if you're in the South and you want to plant in the fall, you can grow them all summer in your container, just protect them from critters. And so the same thing, if you're planting in a container, you're going to fill that up with your planting soil and make sure that when you put your seed in, the root's going to go down and the shoot's going to go up. So make it as flat as possible. You can see that's what I'm doing here. And this one, the root's kind of sticking straight out. So orient it in a way so that the root's going to go down. Also, we want the seed to be down about 1 inch deep. So I put the seed in, then I top it off with some soilless mix, and then we tamp it down nice and firm, and we leave about 1 inch of head space in the top of the container so when you water it, the soil doesn't just blast out. But you want your seed about 1 inch down or up to basically about your knuckle. Don't plant deeper than that or the seed might rot. So make sure it's not too deep. That's important. And then consider the container that you're using. Now we get these commercially, but they basically show you what you need to do. You need a container that's longer than it is wide because you want to make sure that your seedling's forming a nice taproot. So you want a nice taproot that goes right down, few lateral roots. So you're going to try to get something that's taller than it is wide. And we have 2 different versions that we use here. The smaller one is great if you're going to grow the seedlings for a couple of months and then plant out. If you're going to grow the seedlings for a year, though, they would get root bound in that. I'd recommend something bigger. This is our 1 gallon pot on the right. And this is what we typically use nowadays is you can grow a lot of seedlings in these 1 gallon containers. And they work really nice. You get a nice taproot. And the roots don't get too root bound after growing for a few months or a year. But you might have a hard time finding these. So look in your garden stores and just try to find something that's taller than it is wide. And you can use a bigger container if you want. And if you can't find anything like that, you'll see in that fact sheet that I was talking about that we even recommend using an old milk container, right? Those paper milk containers, just cut the top off, put a few holes in the bottom, throw a little gravel in the bottom to help with drainage, and then fill it with soil and plant in that. That's got the right shape of being taller than it is wide. So here's a few tips about the seed mix. Now, we often buy our seed mix, get commercial seed mix that not everybody can get. But the basic premise to the seed mix is make sure it's well drained. So don't get potting mix. Those have a lot of organic material in them and not a lot of good drainage material in them. Garden soils are usually too rich as well. They have a lot of compost in them and they don't have enough drainage. So you need to get something that's well drained. It could have some organic matter in it, but you want it to be well drained. In the old days, we used to mix equal amounts of peat, perlite, and vermiculite. And that works pretty well, but it doesn't have a lot of structure to it to hold it together, and it almost drains too well, and they dry out pretty quickly. So we suggest that if you're going to make your own mix, make sure you're getting these components, peat at least, vermiculite, something to help with drainage, and then you could add some native soils to it. We like to add composted forest products like pine fines or pine bark mulch. Those work really well. They will actually hold in a lot of moisture, but they help keep the soils really well drained. But we'll mix them with perlite and vermiculite to make sure they're drained really well. Don't use bark chips or wood chips. You have to get the things that are decomposed. So don't get like those big chunks of bark or, the wood chips that aren't decomposed at all. You can get some commercial mixes. Some things you can find locally. They've got BK65 at some garden shops. We found something locally called raised bed garden soil. It's made with composted forest products, mostly bark mulch. It's got a lot of vermiculite and peat in it. We mix that with vermiculite to improve drainage. But whatever you do, look around, talk to your garden center folks and tell them you need something that's a seed starter mix or something that's well drained, and you should be okay. The main thing is watch how wet your soil is. Check it out when you're working with it. Make sure it's not too heavy, not holding too much moisture. It's not good for your seeds to be super wet. You don't want them super dry either. So just monitor your soil and make sure that it's moist but well drained. So once you have your seedling and you're ready to plant it out in the field, one thing we were talking about earlier is make sure the seedlings are as big as possible. So you might want to start them in the winter, grow them for a few months. You can even grow them in a container for a year before you plant, depending on where in the country you are. Depends on if you're going to plant in the spring or the fall, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when you're planting, if there's still a nut attached, get the seedling big enough that it could live without the nut, and then gently pull that nut off. If there's a nut attached, squirrels will try to get it and they'll kill your seedling trying to get the nut. And then, of course, if your seedlings have been growing inside your house or a greenhouse or a hoop house or anything for months, you're going to want to harden it off before you put it outside. That just means putting it outside gradually during the day over the course of a week or so. Let it harden off before you plant it outside. And then when you're planting, you're going to do the same thing with containerized seedlings, or if you get bare root seedlings, you're going to basically use the same strategy when you're planting. You're going to dig an appropriate size hole, big enough for the roots, but the more the soil is packed, like if you're planting in a park or someplace, and you then dig a bigger hole. Dig a really big hole, amend it if you need to, put the soil back in, and then start with a hole just big enough for the roots. And when you plant it, whether it's if it's a bare root seedling, you're just going to plant it straight in. If it's a containerized seedling, you're going to actually knock some of that soilless mix off so that you can see the roots. But in either case, you want to see the roots and you want to be able to spread them out when you're planting them. You're going to want to make sure that your taproot is pointed down, but the lateral roots are spread out. Sometimes there's not an obvious taproot, but if there's a bunch of big roots, get them basically pointing down and spread them out. And you're going to take that native soil and you're going to kind of work that in between the roots so that your roots aren't all packed together. They're spread out in the soil and they're making good contact with the native soil. And then, of course, make sure that your root crown is right at ground level. Don't bury the root crown, and then tamp the soil down around it. You don't want any ear spaces. If you're working with bare root seedlings, we recommend you plant right away so they don't dry out. But as Hoy mentioned, if you keep the roots moist but not wet and keep them in a cool place, they'll stay for a long time. If you're going to keep them longer than that, sometimes I'll put some damp mulch around the roots just to keep them from drying out. Just avoid dry roots. Plant as soon as you can. Planting as soon as you can is relative to where you live, of course. So there's different considerations depending on where in the country you are. Mostly if you're going to direct seed, if you're working in an orchard or in a place where you're safe putting seeds right in the ground and not in the forest because critters will get them, and pretty much not in a high profile place because you're going to want to start with a big seedling. But let's say you're putting in an orchard and you're direct seeding, you're going to want to plant the seeds as soon as the ground can be worked. If you have frozen ground, wait. But this might be before the last frost of the season, but the seeds are going to be under the ground, so they'll be okay. Even if there's a little bit of frost. By the time they germinate, you should be past the last frost date. So seeds, we usually say plant as soon as you can, based on your area, when the soil is easy to work. and close to that last frost date, but get them in the ground as soon as possible so they can start getting roots in, especially in the south. You want those roots getting in as soon as possible. The better root system you have, the better your trees will be able to handle those hot summers. If you're working with seedlings now, there's a few considerations. If you're in the north, you almost always want to plant in the spring and let your seedlings get well established. You want those roots in the ground and that taproot holding that, anchoring that seedling down. Otherwise, frost heaves could knock your seedling out of the ground. So you don't really want to plant in the fall in the north, or your seedling could get kicked out of the ground by frost heaves. But if you're in the south, we typically want to plant in the fall and let those roots grow during the winter and especially in early spring and get as established as possible before you run into drought conditions in the summer. Your seedlings will be more resilient to drought if they have a really good root system and a deep taproot. So planting in the fall could help. You might still have to water your seedlings though. So north, you're going to want to plant in spring after the last frost, and south, you can plant from fall through the winter or even in early spring, but be mindful of drought conditions. And if you do run into drought conditions, be prepared to water your seedlings. Also up in the north, you might run into some issues with winter injury. If your seedlings came from Meadowview and you're planting in a place like Vermont, you could plant close to the forest and hope the forest provides some protection. We've seen that planting, if you're planting in a forest in an open site, you're probably okay. But if your seedlings are planted way out in the open and they're vulnerable to freezing, they'll eventually grow out of it. Usually larger trees are more resilient to freezing injury, but small seedlings can be susceptible in their first few years. So if you're going to have sustained freezing, sub-freezing temperatures, you might want to cover your seedlings just during those first few years while they're growing to help prevent some of this winter injury. And in the south, drought again is a big problem. We have a lot of issues with drought during the first few years. So, planting in the fall can help with that a lot, but you might have to water your seedlings if you have the ability to water and it's been weeks since you've had rain. Consider watering your seedlings. The other problem in the south is Phytophthora. It's a soil pathogen. So this is a problem mostly in soils that have a high clay content and or are wet. So avoid planting in clay sites, wet sites, or places that have had a lot of disturbance. Old agriculture sites often have a lot of Phytophthora. Please refer to that fact sheet. I was showing you where our fact sheets are on the website. We have a fact sheet on Phytophthora. If you're in the south, you might want to educate yourself on Phytophthora and the risks and things you can do to help not run into that problem. Similarly, Ambrosia beetles, they're not just a problem in the south anymore. They're making their way north. So look at that fact sheet about Ambrosia beetles, but you want to monitor for this. And the best way to do it is keep an eye on your seedlings when they're young. If you see these toothpick-like frass on your seedlings, you're going to want to treat all of your trees with, there's a couple of different things we use to treat them. Get it on the fact sheet, but please look at the fact sheet about Ambrosia beetles, especially if you're in the south. In the south, Ambrosia beetles are very frequently a problem in our orchards. So make sure you're aware of it and you're prepared for it. And then, of course, I'm just going to finish up with a few tips on maintenance or protecting your trees. Deer are a big problem almost everywhere in the country. They'll eat your seedlings, so you do have to protect them from deer. Now, if you're planting a lot of seedlings, you might want to put up some type of a fence. Here, these guys are installing a fence. They're using some 10X nylon fencing. It works really well. They put up the post. They run that fencing. You can do a more elaborate fence. They cost more. You can do an electric fence. They're only good if you do lots of maintenance and take care of them, but they can be effective. There's so many different ways to fence off your orchard that you're just going to have to do some research and figure it out. Talk to your RSC if you want more information. But if you're only planting a few trees, you might want to use a deer cage like this. So you can put a deer cage around your trees, just get some welded wire fencing, 4 foot tall, 5 foot tall, cut into sections, roll it into a hoop and put it around your seedling and stake it in. That's usually pretty good protection while your seedlings are young and vulnerable, and it'll help protect them from deer. It's really important to protect your seedlings from deer because they love to eat chestnut seedlings. Also, tree tubes. This is something that's come up a lot. There's no perfect tree tube. So you're going to get something that you can put around your tree, and you're going to need to sink that into the ground at least 3 or 4 inches. And that's to protect your trees from voles. And voles are a problem all over the chestnut range. It doesn't mean every seedling will get eaten by voles, but if you don't protect it from voles, there's a good chance voles will kill your seedling. And boy, we've had so many problems with voles. There's different things you can do to protect your trees from voles, but I think the best way to protect your trees is to put a tree tube around your tree and sink that deep into the ground. Now notice that this is one of those plastic tree tubes that you can probably get at a garden center or any place that sells nursery stuff. But notice that this is not a tall tree tube. We recommend against tall tree tubes. They make the seedlings grow spindly and tall, and they're not sturdy and healthy. And you want a sturdy, healthy tree, so don't use those tall tree tubes. Not saying people haven't used them and been successful, but we run into a lot of problems with them. So we recommend using a short tube. You can make a tube out of, say, some flashing, score your flashing and fold it to break it, roll it in half, roll it up into a tube and tape it, sink that into the ground. But whatever you do, get something to protect your tree and sink it into the ground nice and deep. And this is also going to be helpful if you're spraying herbicide to keep the grasses and weeds back, which the seedling in this picture needs a little bit of that. But do whatever it takes to protect your tree, both a tree tube to protect from voles and a deer cage of some sort to protect from deer, and control the weeds and grasses. Now, you can see that I'm showing you some pictures of weed barrier fabric. You could also use mulch, but those come with caveats. Weed barrier fabrics and mulch encourage more vole predation. So if you're gonna use some weed barrier fabric or mulch to help with the weed issue, you can, but you really have to make sure you got that tree tube around your seedling pushed down deep in the soil, because you're only gonna have more voles if you use one of these types of things. You could skip the weed barrier fabric and the mulch and just rely on herbicide or hand pulling of the weeds. So just whatever it takes though, keep the grasses back and don't let them kill your tree, because chestnut trees do not like grasses or weeds or other trees growing next to them. And so that's it. Remember, look at that website, look at our website to get the fact sheet on get our growing manual, other fact sheets on that website that will help you out if you need it. And of course, if you have any questions, please contact any of the RSCs for more help.
Thanks, Tom. You covered a lot of territory there. Thanks for putting all that together. And so I know some folks asked for a picture of a cage, so he showed that. John, I love you say he now has barbed wire around my tree cages. John's in Pittsburgh, of all places, and still needs to protect from deer with barbed wire. There are so many questions here. We've answered almost 60 in the Q&A. So if you guys want to go back through and look at some of those answered questions, click on the Q&A, click on the answered, and you'll be able to see those answers. Let's see. Tom, you said you wanted to answer this question live from Paul. He says, about 20 of my seeds send up a shoot with no leaves forming. What gives?
I meant to actually type the answer and I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, it's likely that they just haven't put up the leaves yet. If they're still small, with chestnuts, usually what'll happen is they'll send up just a little piece of shoot first, and then after a while the leaves will form on it. That doesn't always do it that way. I don't know how long it's been since they shot up that little shoot, but I would say just wait a little bit. They'll probably produce leaves.
Yeah, and I get that happening a lot in a couple of situations where either it's too wet, so often there's like a root rot pathogen, not Phytophthora. It could be Phytophthora, but that's not. Usually I'm talking about a Pythium or a damping off kind of a fungus. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes I see it happening because the seeds got froze or really cold in storage and something happened. So there's a lot of different reasons why that would happen. But I think better storage and making sure that your soil is potting media or soil is sterile are going to help you recover from some of that. I'm going to ask someone from the crew, I don't know, Kendra or Shayna, do you guys want to answer the question about the Germplasm Agreement? Someone wanted to see if someone would cover that, what it is, and just really super high level.
Well, I think I teased that in my talk and then missed this question. So sure, I can cover that at a high level. So the Germplasm Agreement is something we've had for years, and it basically just says that while our trees are still in research and development phase, like anything from our breeding program, TACF still kind of owns that germplasm. We don't want you selling it to anyone else. And really, it's not so much that we don't want it to get out. Obviously, we want people to plant chestnuts. We don't want misinformation in marketing. So these trees aren't quite ready for prime time. It's more of a kind of a protection of research material. But so we do have that agreement for anything from our breeding program. Wild type trees, I know there are a few questions about trading wild type trees. No one owns those. No one's research money and time and effort have gone into those. You can trade those as you will. But the material from our breeding program is covered under our germplasm agreement. So I hope that covers that. It's written in legalese. It's a pretty dense document, but the basic thing is please don't sell our trees if you end up planting some of them.
Thanks, Kendra. I've had a lot of questions about mycorrhizae, probably 5 or 6. So I'm going to cover that. So mycorrhizae can help. It can improve survival and growth, but in most of the studies that we've seen, it's not necessary. So if you want to apply mycorrhizae, go for it. Mycorrhizae tend to be species specific. So don't get a pine branded mycorrhizae, get something that's maybe meant for oak, or if you can, even better, chestnut. We often recommend if you can gather some duff layer from around a wild chestnut, you can probably inoculate with suitable mycorrhizae just by doing that. Grab a spoonful, throw it in with your potting media. That should inoculate your potting media with mycorrhizae. What studies have shown is that mycorrhizae typically blow in about 3 years after planting. So again, you can do it, but don't fret. If you didn't do it, you're going to be okay. It's not 100% necessary. I don't even know where to start. There's just so many of them. Let's see here. Oh, okay, when do you install the tree tube for bare root planting? I assume the seedling needs to be like a foot tall before installing the tree tube. Hoy, you want to cover that?
Sure. So we have found it's actually best to install the tree tube right at the time of planting. You've already loosened that soil. You don't need the stem to be leafed out. You don't need it to have broken bud, and you're there. You may as well be efficient with your time and energy and just do it all at once. It's not going to have a negative impact, and it's actually helpful because you can settle that tree tube down into the soil slightly and get a nice, secure barrier there at the base.
Thanks, Hoy. Let's see, I have some questions about fungicide. Tom, I see you typing. Do you just want to say it?
Say it? Yep. Okay. We think so. We don't know for sure because fungicides didn't used to work, but Steve Jeffers thinks that some of the new formulations seem to be really applicable to chestnut-like pathogens, and so thinks it would work on chestnut light. So we're testing that right now. We don't know yet, but we are in the process of testing that. We have high hopes for using fungicides to protect our wild trees.
Cool, thank you. Let's see, has anyone noted interactions between chestnut plantings and fire ant infestation? None that I'm aware of. No, okay. I think when we say disturbed site, we mainly mean a site that has the overstory has been cut or the trees have been cut, not necessarily that the soil has been disturbed. So I think that there probably is not a correlation there. I've never heard anyone look into that. John, hey John, is there any activity or interest current in the native range fringe on the northern coast of Lake Erie? Yeah, I know the Canadian Chestnut Council, the CCC, is interested in their own native Canadian types. They've been working to conserve and preserve their trees, much like we are here in the US. So yeah, I mean, and I would contact the CCC about their efforts to do that, but I know they've particularly been interested in those, and definitely the ones on the way northern fringe on like PEI and places like that. So Dan asks, can I use, to avoid using glyphosate or some other herbicide, can I use a vinegar type spray or some sort of other natural herbicide? Yeah, you can. I mean, we've used, what was that, Hoy? Was that an olive? It was an olive clove oil. We've tried people burning. We've tried vinegar herbicides. They work for like a week. And then the weeds grow back. Hoy, I don't know if you have anything else to say about it.
Anecdotal, my experience has been that the vinegar formulations will work. They're much more effective on broadleaf species, especially when they're applied very early. That is when you'll get the best control. So it's possible if you have like Japanese stiltgrass or another invasive, really aggressive type of ground cover, you could try it, but I would lean toward a heavier hitting herbicide personally.
Agreed. And or a covering. Other people have said cardboard. Tom showed the weed fabric. All of those are effective, but again, you can also invite voles with those types of coverings, and you don't know you got a vole problem until you got a vole problem, and that's a problem. Mm-hmm. They can really take out some established trees. We had 9-inch caliper trees at the base in a planting in New Jersey that got eaten by voles. It didn't go all the way around, but it certainly gnawed off about half the cambium, and that the trees didn't like that. Any benefit to fertilizing seedlings with corn gluten or Milorganite? Anyone have an answer to that?
What was the question?
Any benefit to fertilizing seedlings with corn gluten or Milorganite?
I don't know.
I have no idea. I'm going to make the same face Tom just made.
I've never used either of them. I mean, chestnuts. Oh, Lily unmuted.
No, I was just going to echo Kendra. I've never used it. I'd be interested to hear how it does if someone else does try it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the formulation of a various fertilizers, chestnuts like nitrogen. They will respond very readily. They like micronutrients. You know, we don't have specific ranges for what fertilization regimes are best for chestnut. I think the Michigan State folks are working on that with their commercial chestnut production. So try it, see how it does. Let us know. What is known about the relationship of specific genes and blight resistance? How soon will TACF get to gene editing with CRISPR? Good question. And someone asked about the deregulation process. I'm going to cover those. So deregulation, probably not this year. Maybe fall of 23, maybe 24. We don't know. The last update we got from the USDA was with the notice of intent. They said that was in August of 2021. They said, we'll probably give you an answer in 2 years. So then that puts us in the fall of 23, maybe, but no guarantee. What do we know about the specific genes? We don't. We know it's very complicated. How soon will we get into gene editing? So the ESF folks are looking at that already. But in order to edit genes, we need to know which genes to edit. So we are going very full force on this, trying to improve tissue culture and other types of vegetative propagation. We're looking more and more frequently at different areas that we could edit to give the most bang for the buck. We're probably 20 years away, 10 at a minimum, from actually being able to implement any sort of CRISPR technology. But we're looking into it. Restoration is going to take a long time. We got time to look at that technology. It's just not going to be now. There are so many more questions in here, and we're already after 1 o'clock. I want to thank you all for joining us. Next, our crew will keep working to answer questions. We'll get you answers as soon as we can. In April, we're going to be talking about habitat suitability. We've got Jen Santoro and her grad student from Villanova. They're going to talk to us about that. I think you all will enjoy that, especially in terms of where are chestnuts growing and where are going to be the best places to plant these things. I'm going to stick around and keep answering questions. If anyone else needs to check out, that's cool. But if anyone else wants to stay around and answer questions, we can do that too. Thanks, everybody. That's the official goodbye. And then we're officially in OT. All right. So someone says, should I contact Penn State or New York or New Jersey about seedlings? I live in Zone 7A. So the New York chapter, you're in New York, you're in luck. They give seeds out to everybody. So I would recommend contacting your local chapter, and they probably still have seeds for you this year. The Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter, their meeting is in Annville, Pennsylvania at the Annville Theater on Saturday, April 2nd, and we'll be giving away seeds to members at that meeting. So if you are up for a trip to Annville, PA, highly recommend it, just east of Hershey. We can do that. Andrew Smith says, Tom, can you finish your comment? I don't know what that's. Comment? I don't know. Maybe Andrew can elaborate.
Andrew, sorry, tell me which comment I was answering and I'll finish it.
So a lot of people are asking about where can they see this later. We record all of our programs and they will all be on our Chestnut Chat page. If you go to acf.org, resources, Chestnut Chat, it's right there. All of them are recorded. They're also on our YouTube page. So check out our TACF's YouTube channel. This is number 35 or 36. All of our past Chestnut Chats are available for review. And we will have those up. I think Kendra says she's going to answer this one live, but the links are all available on the right, and maybe someone will put that in there too. Andrew says from Chuck.
I'm looking.
All right.
Get it.
Let's see. What fungicides are you looking at?
Propiconazole and azoxystrobin. We're also looking at this. It's a peptide. It's a special formulation that it's kind of still secret, but it's this peptide stimulates an immune response in the host. So we're going to see if we could do something like that. But primarily, we're looking at propiconazole and azoxystrobin. And
propiconazole, as I showed that picture from the Duke Orchard at Purdue, and that's propiconazole that they were using there. So it does give some increased survival. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to keep them living forever, but it does seem to give some moderate longevity, improvement in longevity. All right, Mike asked us about gave some information about Milorganite. Thank you for giving some additional information there. Sarah, May 20 site analysis. I assume it's required before a substantial investment were to be put on a site. I recall a lot of it was about elevation above wet zones. Oh, and John, I got your email too, and I'll get back to you. So yeah, I mean, we recommend that not necessarily for our investment, but for yours as a grower. Yeah, I recommend you check it. But the best way really to see if trees are going to grow is to plant some trees. So, you know, that wild seedling program, getting in touch with your local chapter to see if they have some wild Americans. Like I said, the New York chapter often has seeds available. The Pennsylvania chapter has seeds available. You know, that's going to be the best way. Plant 20 or so and see if they grow. You know, definitely do a site analysis and see if it's good, if you even want to go that far. Let's see, John says, when I first got my nuts, since I never ready to pot them, they go into moist potting media. That way the radicals get some moisture. And in lieu of those long skinny pots, my new favorite containers are the rectangular buckets that kitty litter comes in, drill a few holes in the bottom. Yeah, that sounds good. Partitioning it out, that's a nice tall pot. I see nothing wrong with that. Paul says, my company is interested in buying chestnut wood from trees that have been thinned or died from any cause. His email is there for anyone. I think, and I see other people are typing. So I think we're pretty much done. I don't see anything else. Anyone else see some stuff in the chat?
You know, one thing that I might point out is the question about stilt grass.
Yeah.
Being a grass, if your big problem is grass, is you can use a grass-specific herbicide like Post, and it won't hurt your chestnut seedlings. We've had some pretty good success controlling stilt grass in our orchards by using a grass-specific herbicide, and it doesn't hurt the seedlings. So you can just go ahead and spray it, and that's great because it grows in the tubes, and we just reach down in there and spray it and kill it.
Awesome.
So for a question from Chuck.
Let me see if it's in the answered.
I'm looking in the answers.
Can you search these?
I must have started answering it.
Yeah, I think I marked it as you guys were answering it live because you were talking about it.
What was the question, Kendra?
It just said from Chuck. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know.
I got mine 2 weeks ago. It was in our house for a week before we read that they should be cold for a period. So we put them in the refrigerator. I thought I answered that. My response was take a look at the seeds. If you left them out for a week, that doesn't necessarily mean that they died. They might be putting out some big radicals. I would check them. And if they seem healthy, if the radicals especially seem healthy, plant them. If they seem all brown, like they browned up and the radical rotted, they're probably not good. But if you're not sure, go ahead and pot them up and see what happens.
Agreed.
That was the
and you
question.
you should see germination in about 2 to 4 weeks. That's usually when they pop. That doesn't mean all of them will come up. Sometimes they wait for longer than that, but 2 to 4 weeks is when you should start see those shoots popping up out of the soil. That was a lot. We covered a lot of ground. About half of our audience has disappeared, so I know we went long today. Thank you all. Hoy, Kendra, Shayna, Lily, Tom, Lisa's had to take off. I'm sure she had another meeting too. So thank you guys for putting this big presentation together. Thank you all for joining us. Any other final words? No?
Thank you.
Just hooray for the weekend, and spring is just about here.
Planting.
Planting.
Growing.
All right. See you, everybody.